This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, your weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is your show for Tuesday, September 27th, 2016, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. And with me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, cube eggs?
Cristina Roach.
Hello.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everybody.
We have a great show for you today. Cristina is going to look into whether you can balance an egg on its end during the equinox. And then I am going to look into whether psychology is in crisis. And finally, Adam will look into whether NASA has changed your zodiac sign.
Uh-oh.
But first, a little something from Pat on advertorials.
So I wanted to mention this really quickly because it was both sad and a little bit funny. This afternoon, my friend Peter sent me a, quote, article that ran in the Ottawa Citizen today. There's a link in the show notes. Do you guys want to take a look?
Sure.
The title is, Pharmaceutical Corporations Are Trying to Halt This Breakthrough Scientific Discovery That Is Poised to Make 90% of All Known Prescription Drugs Obsolete. So here's a quote from the article. Imagine for a moment living your life without sickness, without soreness, without cancer or diabetes, without the aches and pains of aging, without allergies, living your life free of heart, lung, and liver problems, free of discomfort, all replaced by total well-being and limitless energy wrapped in a body of wrinkle-free, youthful-looking skin.
Shut up and take my money.
Right. So it goes on to make a bunch of insane claims, and it really does look like a legitimate article if you guys took a look.
Yeah, the layout is a fake news article.
Right.
No question.
This looks like a legitimate article, except for the word advertisement in a small font at the very top. This is, of course, what has become known as an advertorial. And it may be the worst one I've ever seen in terms of being made to look like an actual news article. So Peter figured we here at TRC might want to look into this product and the claims that they're making, and maybe we'll do that at some point. But what I thought was really interesting about this was the byline.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys see the byline in it?
I do.
Go ahead and read it, Adam.
Christopher Jeffries, Chief Science Editor.
So as you said, Adam, it refers to the chief science editor, and it actually has a picture of Mr. Jeffries. So I thought to myself, who is this guy?
Yeah.
I photoshopped out the byline part and did a reverse image lookup and got 3 pages of hits on it.
That's some good sleuthing, Pat.
So it turns out that Christopher Jeffries, he's also an IT support person for a company called CompuData. He sells all sorts of gadgets at gogadgety.com. He gives free expert advice on all your sign needs at Shop Sign-O-Rama. He's also very pleased with the website that Studio 72 built for him, giving them an excellent review, although he does go by the name John Green, and he owns Melbourne Party Essentials on that site. I could go on, but in fact, according to several stock photo sites, his real name is Man Smiling with Glasses 150.jpg.
To be fair, that's awesome. A good title. I aspire to be that man.
So Cristina and I had a pretty good laugh looking at all the places that this guy showed up, so I thought I would share. I'll put some links in the show notes to some of the funnier ones. I also wanted to take a moment to say, shame on you for running this Ottawa Citizen. That's terrible.
That's just really bad.
The next thing you know, the Ottawa Citizen will be balancing eggs on the equinox because that's the only time they can do it. Isn't that right, Cristina?
Every year around the spring equinox, which is in or around March 20th, and the fall equinox, which happens around September 22nd, you may see your friends share photos or videos on social media of eggs magically standing up by themselves. The explanation given for this feat is that it is possible due to planetary alignment and the way the Earth is tilted on its axis during the equinox. So is it true that the equinox can cause an egg to obtain the right amount of gravitational pull to allow it to stand on its own? Well, let's start with defining equinox, which is an astronomical event occurring twice each year when the plane of Earth's equator passes through the center of the sun. The word equinox comes from Latin meaning equal night. Theoretically, it's a celestial event when all points on the surface of Earth experience 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. As an aside, this isn't 100% accurate because technically times of sunset and sunrise vary depending on longitude and latitude. So dates when day and night are closest together in length really depend on location, but close enough. So the claim going around with these photos or videos is that there is a special property of the equinox that allows eggs to be balanced on their ends that day. The Chinese are often cited as having originated the practice of egg balancing during the equinox. According to Snopes, quote, just as the equinox symbolically restores balance to the world by signaling its rebirth after a season of darkness, the equinox literally balances the day by dividing it into equal portions of darkness and light. If the symbol of fertility, eggs, could be balanced on end during a day equally divided between day and night, this was a sign that all nature was in harmony. So the notion that an egg can balance specifically during the equinox comes from the thought that because of the position of the sun, moon, and earth, the pull of gravity is equalized so the egg is less likely to fall over. Says Harry Keller, PhD and CEO of Smart Science Education. This is simply not true. Even were there such a solar influence, it would only work in one place at a time, and that place would be moving at a speed on the surface of the Earth of about 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. You would not have time to balance your egg. In 1987, the Associated Press reported a scientific trial from astronomer Frank D. Gigo of the University of Minnesota. He published his research concluding that, yep, you could balance an egg, in fact, several eggs during the equinox. Gigo used 4 samples of a dozen eggs each, which he attempted to balance on their large ends over a period of several days. And guess what? He could also balance the eggs during other times throughout the calendar year. What? What? Eggs can have little bumps and irregularities, so not every egg is necessarily a good candidate, but you too can balance an egg on its end with some practice and a whole lot of patience. One key is finding an egg with the yolk centered in the shell. Says Keller, we stand upright by keeping on our own personal centers of gravity within the bounds of our feet on the ground. This is why standing on 2 feet is easier than standing on only 1 foot. So the whole notion of balancing eggs on their ends during the equinox is just an old myth that likely keeps getting perpetuated because people only try it during the equinox, leading them to believe there's something special happening on those days. So there you go.
Thanks, Cristina. I think it's interesting that people are actually doing some decent science and that they're replicating whether you can stand an egg on its end, but they're not doing it frequently enough, so they're misunderstanding the nature of the phenomenon. Does faking a smile make you happier? Does standing in a power pose bring you more confidence? Does your willpower get depleted over time? Great questions, Darren. Thanks, Darren. And you'll be getting some answers, but they may not be what was once believed. Oh. Depending on who you have in your Facebook feed or the websites you frequent, you may have heard stirrings about some problems in the field of psychology. I'm going to ask the panel, have any of you heard of this? Mainly in the past week, we'll say.
Yeah, I saw a friend of the show, Jim Davies, shared an article about this, saying that maybe some of these were referenced in his book. He's a little concerned about it.
Pat and Cristina?
I'll say no, that I didn't.
I've been sick, as you can probably hear, so...
Right, fair enough. Now, knowing that there are problems in science is nothing new. I've talked about it several times on the show over the past several years. As well, knowing that psychology has had some problems reproducing some of their key results won't be new information to regular listeners, as I covered that topic just over a year ago on episode 365.
Great episode.
Now, before we get into things a bit more, I wanted to ask the panel, why do you trust science? Adam.
This is the best we've got.
That's short and sweet. All right. Pat and Cristina?
Yeah, I would agree. It's not perfect, but it's the best thing we've got.
Same answer from me.
Great. Simple words, no detail. I have Trump on my show here. Now, thinking a bit more broadly why I trust science, you have rigorous reasoning, quantitative analysis, peer review, transparency, and hopefully changing one's mind based on evidence.
Yeah.
We love all these things about science.
Absolutely.
And as a quick aside, we love all these things and assume that pseudoscience doesn't have any of them, but that isn't quite true. It's more nuanced and complicated than you might think, and you can check out episode 399 for me covering that.
Yeah, I think pseudoscience has some, but not all of them, and that's usually the problem, right?
Right. Now, so what happens when a science, or a field, or a subdiscipline of a science seems to lack these characteristics? Well, that's problematic. and it might even be a crisis. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of what's going on in psychology, and I certainly encourage you to read more if you're interested. Broadly speaking, Susan Fiske wrote a letter for publication in the Association of Psychological Science, Observer, and this letter was leaked early on Dropbox. Okay? And this is from Business Insider. Former president of the Association for Psychological Science, Susan Fiske, and a respected researcher at Princeton, attacks unnamed adversaries of psychology. She calls them names like methodological terrorist and writes that their criticism of fellow researchers should happen in private, in respect to journals, or not at all.
Ooh.
It was multiple paragraphs saying that too many people are attacking both the science and the scientists on Facebook, Twitter, and other different means. They're being very angry. People feel coward. This is not the way to do science. It should be more organized. It should be more respectful. And there should be more peer review in these types of comments back and forth.
Okay.
Andrew Gelman, a statistician and not a psychologist, wrote a long blog post describing some of the context and his concerns with both her tone and her perspective. Now, Gelman tries to understand how things got to this point, as context is important, so he describes some key milestones over the past decades where people have raised concerns about statistical rigor and validity at different points. And I'm going to provide you a partial list now. I'm mainly using one of Gelman's blog posts, which you can find at trcpodcast.com. And he starts with the 1960s and 70s, where Paul Meehl argues that the standard paradigm of experimental psychology doesn't work. So that's where the history of this starts. He says it's too easy for researchers to kind of manipulate things to find significant results.
Yeah.
In the 80s and 90s, there's issues raised with null hypothesis testing and some of the complications thereof. In 2005, John Ioannidis publishes a paper called Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. I believe I've used that on one of the earlier segments.
Yeah.
There's another publication around that time about voodoo correlations and social neuroscience. This is why you shouldn't trust fMRI stuff.
Yeah.
In 2011, Joseph Simons, Leif Nielsen, and Uri Simonson published a paper called False Positive Psychology. And they talk about researcher degrees of freedom, meaning the researcher has different ways to manipulate results to try to get what they want, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. They also come up with the term p-hacking, as in hacking the p-value for significance to get what you want.
Nice.
In 2012, Gregory Francis publishes Too Good to Be True, and this leads off a series of papers arguing that repeated statistically significant results can be a sign of selection bias. Additionally, and this is me inserting something from a Slate article, a 2012 survey of the top 100 psychology journals found that barely 1% of papers published since 1990 were purely attempts at reproducing previous findings. Some of the most prestigious journals have maintained explicit policies against replication efforts. For example, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology published a paper purporting to support the existence of ESP like precognition, but would not publish papers that failed to replicate that or any other discovery. They've actually changed their minds and now they're willing to publish replications that don't actually replicate. Mm-hmm. Science, the famous Science magazine, publishes technical comments on its own articles, but only if they are submitted within 3 months of the original publication, which leaves little time to conduct and document a replication attempt.
Oh, yeah.
So you can see the deck is stacked even against trying to replicate stuff and get those things published.
Yep.
Now, Gelman lists various other concerns raised by papers, all in the same theme about reproduction, and most recently with the repercussions of the reproducibility project still being felt. This was started in 2011. It's still going, started by Brian Nosek and others in this large collaborative research project. That's what I covered about a year ago. Gelman now believes when findings aren't replicated, people are not surprised. He said the emperor has no clothes, and the whole discipline is in crisis. Psychology in general, but more specifically social psychology. Of course, this can't be quite true, because not everyone thinks this, otherwise the entire discipline would crumble now, right? So I was trying to give you some context of why Susan Fiske might have said what she said, and why other people are having issues with what she said. Mm-hmm. Now, Gelman takes great issue with Susan's characterization of criticism outside these formal channels. He believes it is often the only recourse. As well, Susan appears to be unwilling to change her mind about her own errors in papers she's published or oversaw the publication of, because she was and is the head of the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And this is a quote. Gelman questions her dedication to her values. Susan deplores, quote, unfiltered trash talk, unmoderated attacks, and adversarial viciousness, and insists on the importance of editorial oversight and peer review. According to Fiske, criticism should be most often in private with a chance to improve, peer review, or at least in moderated exchanges, curated comments and rebuttals. And she writes of scientific standards, ethical norms, and mutual respect. And there is some logic to that it sounds like that's how you'd want a more civilized debate, because tweeting things, which are very short characters, is not a good discussion usually to have on any level.
Yeah.
But, as Gelman points out, she expressed these views in an unvetted attack in an unmoderated forum with no peer review or opportunity for comments or rebuttals. She has access. She can publish this article at the beginning of a magazine, science magazine, and she can call people methodological terrorists, which of course is a very catchy phrase which people are going to use against you. Now, Gelman is sympathetic. He says he didn't bring this up to be like, haha, look, you're inconsistent. More that he was trying to sympathize with the difficult position she's in. And here's a quote. She's seeing her professional world collapsing, and the work of her friends and colleagues is being questioned in a way that no one could have imagined 10 years ago. It's scary, and it's got to be a lot easier for her to blame some unnamed terrorist than confront the gaps in her own understanding of research methods. So put this another way, this is also still a quote, Fisk and her friends and students have followed a certain path which has given them fame, fortune, and acclaim. Question the path, and you question the legitimacy of all that came from it, and that can't be pleasant. If you're a big name in the field, you have a huge incentive to not look at all the edifice that you created, which may be crumbling under your feet. Now, I thought this was reasonable, and Gelman was clear and polite in tone, as well as pretty thorough. This blog post got a lot of attention. It was spread around quite widely, and was actually followed the next day with another one. Why is the scientific replication crisis centered on psychology? So just to give you context, it seems like there is a replication crisis. It seems like there is a consistent problem. It's not sure exactly what to do about it, but well, wait, why psychology? It's not like other disciplines don't have the problem, and that's what I also wanted to remind you. This happens in economics, this happens in medicine, this happens in cell biology, this happens in certain aspects of cosmology. It's a pervasive problem. So these are Gelman's factors he suggests. This one is also linked at trcpodcast.com. Number 1, sophistication. Psychology's discourse on validity, reliability, and latent constructs is much more sophisticated than the usual treatment of measurement in statistics, economics, biology, etc. So, because it's more sophisticated, it's more likely to cause some problems. 2, overconfidence deriving from research designs. He said, when we talk about the replication crisis in psychology, we're mostly talking about lab experiments and surveys. Either way, you can get a clean identification of comparisons. So it's easier to see what the comparison is, and then it's also easier to see what might have gone wrong. 3, openness. He said, this one hurts. Psychology's bad press is in part of a consequence of its open culture, which is manifest in various ways. To start with, psychology is institutionally open. One can compare it to economics, which is notoriously resistant to ideas coming from other fields. And compared to medicine, psychology is much less restricted by financial and legal considerations. Biology and medicine are big business, and there are huge financial incentives for suppressing negative results, silencing critics, and flat-out cheating. In psychology, it's relatively easy to get your hand on the data or at least to find mistakes in published work. So this is almost like a biased sample of why you can find out that psychology is more problematic, not that psychology necessarily is. 4, involvement of some of the prominent academics. So there's a legitimate feeling that the replication crisis strikes at the heart of psychology, or at least social psychology. It's hard to dismiss it as a series of isolated incidents. And finally, he writes, psychology research is often of general interest, hence all the press coverage and TED Talks and so on, and accessible both in subject matter and its methods. Biomedicine is all about development and DNA and all sorts of actual science, which was an interesting phrase. To understand empirical economics, you need to know about regression models, but the ideas and methods of psychology are right out in the open for all to see. And that's quite true. If I tell you about a finding in molecular biology, you might be like, A, I don't understand what you just said. B, I don't know how that relates to my life. And C, what? It just doesn't work. And same thing with economics. Here's an economics model, something esoteric about the tax code, which may then affect something about incentives and human behavior. Versus like, oh, if I stand in a certain pose, I feel more confident.
Yeah.
Or why do people do what they do? This is a general human curiosity.
Yeah.
Those 3 questions I asked at the beginning, does faking a smile make you happier? This is the idea that by manipulating your facial features, you can then influence your mood. It turns out that's not true. And what's interesting is if you know Daniel Kahneman, he wrote that great book, Thinking Fast and Slow, on the cover is a pencil with bite marks in it, with the idea that if you hold a pencil in your teeth, it's like faking a smile, which makes you happier. So that's not true. Does standing in a power pose make you more confident? No, it doesn't. The woman who was part of the research team has since said, I no longer believe in this. I don't think there's good evidence for it. I don't think the effects are real. But her TED Talk has 36 million views on it. Does your willpower get depleted over time? No, it doesn't. These things just don't work. As well as the idea of priming, that if you make someone think about their age and the elderly, they'll be likely to act more slowly. It turns out that's not true either. And you have Daniel Kahneman saying, oh, the results are so true, you just have to believe them. And you're like, oh, but these are the giants in the field. So I have to admit, this does sadden me. And I know there's lots of problems, and I know every time I hear of a study, I'm like, you might as well flip a coin. Who knows if it's true or not? And now I feel like, is it 60% now? Is it 70%? But overall, this is for the best, because we understand there's a problem. So what can be done? Well, pre-registration of trials is a good idea. Pre-registration of replication efforts, which they have used already in some publications, where, look, you're going to do replication. No matter what you find, we're going to publish it. Because people want to get a publication, so if you can promise them a publication and they get to replicate something, it's good for the field.
Yep.
Also, just the general encouragement of the publication of replications or null results, and of course, even greater cognitive humility. I thought there was an interesting line quoted in Business Insider from social psychologist Michael Inslicht, who wrote on a blog back in February, "Our problems are not small, and they will not be remedied by small fixes. Our problems are systemic, and they are at the core of how we conduct our science."
I just think of when someone says something that's compelling and interesting, like a study that proves something that's unintuitive, it gets shared so much and it gets seen so much. And then, if someone's going to share something that says, by the way, that thing wasn't true, it's not as interesting. That's just how people are, and it's going to contribute to this kind of thing.
So the concern for me is that we often say, just because you saw it on Facebook doesn't mean it's true. Be careful who's sharing what. And but I'm sharing it from a prestigious journal, and the author is also someone who's well respected. And you're like, and not that either now.
Yeah, and it's the actual source material, not the editorial bias on it. Oh, yeah.
So there's just a big, big problem, and I guess it just means ramping up the skepticism. Well, it seems that social psychology might have lost its way. At least we have the stars to guide us, including telling me what my personality as well as my day is like. Adam, please don't take that away from me.
Did you guys hear that NASA changed the zodiac signs?
I did! First Pluto, now this!
Yeah.
Did you guys wonder why NASA, which studies astronomy, real science, would have anything to do with astrology, which is nonsense pseudoscience mumbo-jumbo? I certainly hope so. Just a quick question before we start. I'm going to come back to this later. Can I get a sort of quick description of what you think astrology means? Darren, you first.
The idea that the position of the sun in relation to the stars and the earth has some effect on my personality.
Okay. Pat and Cristina?
My understanding is that it's all celestial bodies in relation to the earth having some sort of influence on the natural world, on us here. But I will say that I think they often work on antiquated models of how things move and where they are.
Well, I'll take that one step further. It has to do with when you were born. So if you're born during a certain time, then your personality is reflected based on exactly what you said, what celestial objects are in the sky at the time of your birth.
Okay, so we're just going to put that one in our back pocket, but all you guys seem to have the understanding. This is about the celestial bodies, the stars, the planets, and things like that. Cristina specified when you were born. All right, we'll get back to that later. So, over the past couple of weeks, many people have ranted and raved about how NASA was really messing their lives by changing their zodiac sign. But did they really do that? Can they really do that? And isn't it all nonsense? So a bit of a primer for those that may not be familiar with the terms or may occasionally make the mistake of mixing them up. We're all human. We can make these mistakes. Astronomy is the real thing. It's the study of planets and all the stuff in space, basically all celestial objects and what they actually do. Astrology is not legitimate. It is not the study of any phenomenon which has any actual bearing on the physical universe we live in. It is pseudoscience which attempts to gain some mystical insight into our own human lives as they relate to the position of various stars and celestial objects in the sky, as you guys described it. We all have zodiac signs which relate to what constellation was in the sky when we were born, and those are meant to somehow translate into what kind of person we are, and based on what we read in the newspaper, what kind of month we're going to have, or week we're going to have. It depends how they frame it. It doesn't matter how simple or complex you make it, from reading your horoscope in the paper to having your charts done by someone who is an expert in a field which has no respectability. Astrology is total junk. So there's no evidence whatsoever that the position of the stars and planets when you were born has any bearing on your personality or life, and horoscopes are intentionally vague, and people find a way to have them fit their lives. So, what did NASA supposedly do? Well, the story, as I found it reported on a number of websites that like to interspace news with reaction gifs of popular celebrities, states that NASA decided that there are 13 signs instead of 12. The 13th astrological sign or zodiac is Ophiuchus, and those sites claim that NASA is deciding to redo all of our zodiac signs based on this, and in doing so have messed up all the date ranges for old signs And here's your new sign, and OMFG, no way, did I really go from an Aquarius to a Capricorn? I am so not a Capricorn, my world makes no sense, F you NASA.
That's what my bumper sticker says, F you NASA.
Isn't this kind of old news, Adam?
Very old news, and Darren's actually covered this twice on the show, as early as episode 14. So what really happened here? So NASA stepped in to clear things up. They made a Tumblr post to clear it up. Why Tumblr? I don't know, because it's the internet getting things out of hand. And I quote, "Did you recently hear that NASA changed the zodiac signs? Nope, we definitely didn't. Here at NASA, we study astronomy, not astrology. We didn't change any zodiac signs. We just did the math. Here are the details." And then they mostly reposted something which was published earlier on NASA's Space Place back in May 2011. And this was used by the various news articles as evidence that the zodiac signs were changing. NASA's Space Place is a part of the NASA website, which is made for children. It has categories which include games, crafts, activities, and more. So much to say, NASA's original article explained that the original constellations did not perfectly split into 12, since they aren't all basically 1/12 of the sky, and there is actually a 13th constellation that the ancient Babylonians chose to leave out because of simplicity. The date ranges of certain signs aren't what we expect they are. And if we basically are looking to determine what constellation is in a straight line formed by the sun and the earth at the time of our birth, we're not going to get what we think we should be getting. Further complication, because the Earth's pole has slowly shifted over the past few thousand years, the constellations in the sky at a certain time of the year are actually not at all the same as they were when the zodiac signs were first introduced. This is not new at all. As I said, Darren's covered it twice. It's called precession. It is a wobble of the Earth's axis which occurs on a 25,800 year cycle. Each zodiac sign covers 30 degrees of the sky, and the Earth's axis has shifted by about 36 degrees since the zodiac signs were first assigned. So NASA did not tell us anything new. They're just reporting in a children's educational section of their site a bit of evidence that astrology is nonsense. Astrologers, who do not represent a legitimate scientific field, argue that this is not valid. Why? One article on astrologer.org tackled what they said was an argument often brought up by rookie journalists. Astrologers counter this by claiming that the constellation zodiacs aren't really what they use. They use tropical zodiacs, which are based on seasons and how the Earth-Sun relationship is, not factoring in stars at all. They simply conveniently use the names of tropical zodiacs which matched the constellations that were in the sky when those tropical zodiacs took place at the time of their assignment. They're saying astrology has nothing to do with stars or planets.
It's a bit misleading given the name, but that's fine.
Obviously, I asked all three of you what you thought it meant. You all said stars and planets.
You're looking at a biased sample, though, Adam.
Sure. So let's. Who else can we ask? Merriam-Webster defines astrology as the divination of the supposed influences of the stars and planets on human affairs and terrestrial events by their positions and aspects. Trying to just change the fundamentals of what astrology means to take out the only thing it ever meant is nonsense. Your field has no respectability. So astrology is nonsense, as I've said. NASA isn't changing the zodiacs. NASA doesn't dictate anything about astrology because they do real science, which is called astronomy. Astrologers, who have no credibility because their field is pseudoscience, have no plans to change your sign, and it seems unlikely that the intellectually devoid horoscopes in your daily paper are going to change their intentionally vague predictions of your financial, professional, and relationship life anytime soon.
Such a Scorpio for saying that.
I'm such an Ophiuchus for saying that.
Thank you, Adam. And to all those astrologically inclined people out there, maybe it's not true and you spend your time on something else. But thank you for listening and spending your time with us. And until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, Cubophiuchus.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
Good night, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Today we learned that I currently can't remember what Pat covered. Yes.
Was that a sum up, or were you doing another segment?
You just use that as a segment.
All right,
so
I can do it. I'll do a shorter sum up if you want.
do a sum up of my sum up.
Sure. Sorry, I got all excited.
I think we learned.
It's awesome. It's awesome.